why not?
Welcome back, everyone. Well, in our never-ending quest to remind you of all the amazing things we can do in our region, right in our backyard here is a state historic site, the Ulysses S. Grant Cottage. My wife and I have been up there a couple of times. Outside of the fact that it's the most beautiful site, you can't believe the views from up on Mount McGregor. This place is just brimming with a real integral part of our history. And joining me today is someone who portrays Ulysses S. Grant at a number of events up there, and a historian, and somebody I can tell you firsthand loves history, and that's Steve Trimm. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
Very nice to have you here.
I'm thrilled to talk about Grant anywhere, including here.
Oh, good. Well, nice to have you. Ulysses S. Grant, many of us know, 18th President of the United States, controversial figure in a number of different ways, commander of the Union troops at the end of the Civil War. I mean, you talk about, and in a lot of ways, people refer to him as the first civil rights president.
That's
Let's go back into this a bit. 18th president, scandal-ridden administration.
So they say. In fact, most of the scandals began in the previous administration and were just revealed during the Grant administration. The negative things we hear about Grant are often Southern propaganda we mistake for history. There's a lot more to the guy than you might believe.
I bet. Now, again, try to put yourself back in history there. The North won the Civil War. The South wasn't going along.
No, they weren't.
Calmly. Let's leave it at that. People refer to the Klan as the first U.S. terrorist organization. They were not going to go quietly. So a lot of that scandal was born in that animosity, wasn't it?
Well, the South just was not going to forgive little Ulysses S. Grant for beating the patrician Robert E. Lee. They assassinated his character at every turn.
I've got it. Fast forward. Ulysses S. Grant, for all of the prominence and all of the celebrity and everything else, really fell on hard times.
Yes, he did.
And what happened?
Well, he was retired finally after all those years of service living in New York. And he was a victim of the Bernie Madoff of 1884. The president of his bank stole every dime that the Grant family had. To recoup what he had lost, he started writing magazine articles about some of his Civil War battles. The public liked what he had to say, and it was suggested he work on his memoirs now, and he realized he could write. Mark Twain, his old friend, had just started a publishing house, said, "I'll publish the book." Grant threw himself into the project in 1884, and then a second tragedy struck. He was diagnosed with terminal cancer. So he was literally racing death to finish his memoirs, which, if Mark Twain was right and they sold, would save his family from poverty.
Now, a very wealthy, I think he was an industrialist, Drexel, right?
Yes, Joseph Drexel.
Owned the land up on Mount McGregor there. I think there was a hotel there at one point, right?
Yes.
And there was a cottage there. And it was Drexel who offered to give the Grant family that cottage so that Ulysses S. Grant could go up there to write his memoirs, Racing Against Death, in an effort to get that book published by his friend Mark Twain. Talk about a story. So he goes up there, right?
Well, it's a very near thing. By the spring of 1885, he's clearly failing and the book's not done. His doctor wanted him somewhere where there was clean and fresh, unpolluted air that might prolong his life. Mr. Drexel offered the cottage. The Grant family came up there, and Grant finished his book at Grant Cottage just 3 days before he died. That's how close it was.
You know, I've read that in a situation like that, you stay alive to complete your mission. And almost at that point, you say, okay, I'm done. I'm ready to go. Now, that was July, end of July, right?
July 23rd, 1885.
Right. And the funeral took place up there at the cottage, correct?
It did.
Now, the cottage itself has been preserved, amazingly preserved for all of these years, including a lot of even the bed linens and everything else that were there at the time that Grant lived there to write this memoir, correct?
Yes, and people are stunned. The great floral arrangements from the funeral are still there.
Wow.
They have survived. It's quite something.
Now, you have to be a very unique person to be able to have the desire to want to portray Ulysses S. Grant. Those are big shoes to fill. Have to be have quite a love of history to want to do this. What drives you to do it?
Grant's personal story more than anything. Yes, he was the great military figure of the Civil War, but in his personal life, he faced challenges morally, ethically, and how he responded to those I found terrifically inspiring and applicable to America today.
Yeah, sure, of course. It was funny, before we went on air, Steve and I were talking, and he said something that I wrote down. We were talking about how great figures in history are inspiration, and they face political, moral, and ethical issues. Just think about where we are in today's political climate. Not a lot has changed. And then you think about civil rights, and unfortunately not a lot has changed there. Some of these struggles that we face as a society are timeless. And I bet you see that.
Sad to say, that's true.
Yeah. Now, you're involved in portraying, and you have to be, Steve reminded me that reenactors take a certain role, but you dress as Ulysses S. Grant.
Yes.
And portraying him at different times in his life.
Yes.
Depending on what the event is at the cottage. And the cottage does 2 events a week throughout the whole summer. One that you told me about that I want to remind our viewers of is coming up on July 2nd.
Yes, President and Mrs. Grant will be there in person to talk about whatever the public wants to hear about. Their personal lives, family life, the Civil War years, the presidential years. Mm-hmm. The Grants had just gotten back from a world tour. Mm-hmm. Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Grant will be there in person.
This is fascinating. Now, the museum itself is really something to see. The cottage has been preserved. The friends of Ulysses S. Grant or the cottage, are responsible for preserving this site. There's also a visitor center up there as well, right? Which is one of the old carriage houses you were telling me on the property. And there's a wealth of knowledge. It's an amazing opportunity to see and relive history and recognize a lot of the issues that they faced back in the late 1800s are still very much applicable today. And we're going to have you back again. I'd really love it if you come as Ulysses S. Grant. That would be, would you do that?
I think that can be arranged.
That could be arranged. And we also have a fundraiser, big fundraiser that in the fall. So we want to stay with you on this so that we can keep our viewers informed. Steve, thank you very much for coming in.
Delighted.
And getting to know you and hearing about this. One other thing you want to plan ahead a little bit. The 23rd is the anniversary of Grant's death. They do Grant Remembrance Day. It's a whole day of events up there at the cottage on the 23rd of July. Thanks again for coming in, and we look forward to having you back again.
I look forward to it too.
Thank you, Steve. To see this interview again, you can head to our website, looktvonline.com.